Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, October the 23rd, 2025. Today, the Sun moves into Scorpio, and in this video, I want to take a fairly detailed look at the Sun in Scorpio and what it might mean. But before I do that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, October the 23rd, 2025. And here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time. So you can see that noon New York time, the Sun is at 0 degrees 30 minutes Scorpio. So, it's been in Scorpio for some time. And if you look at the chart for the moment the Sun moves into Scorpio, well, London time, the Sun moved into Scorpio at 4:51 a.m. today. So that's quite early in the morning. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the Sun will move into Scorpio probably this afternoon, maybe late this afternoon. And if you're in the Americas, well, last night on Wednesday evening, the Sun moved into Scorpio. So that is the big event, and this does mean that we now have 4 planets in Scorpio. That is as good as it gets. Sun, Mars, Mercury, Moon, in this water sign. And I don't want to say too much about what that means for the Sun moving into Scorpio here, because at the end of this video I'll be looking at the Sun in Scorpio in some detail. Now we do have the Moon in Scorpio as well, so that means, or at least that's a reminder, that we've just had a new moon. So we had the Libra new moon at 28 Libra, but now both the Sun and the Moon are in Scorpio, but we're still feeling the new moon. The new moon comes in waves. So let me explain that. So you had a new moon at 28 Libra. The moon goes faster than the Sun. The moon moves into Scorpio. So you have a situation where you've got the Sun in Libra, moon in Scorpio. So the new moon loses some of its intensity when the moon changes sign. And then the Sun eventually gets into Scorpio before the moon has had a chance to leave. So in a way, the new moon is reasserting itself. And so this underlines the fact that this new moon, I think, is just strange. I described this new moon as being, a couple of days ago, I said it was kind of like the beginning of the end. This new moon does have the quality of a full moon. That's certainly my view on the matter. I think that this new moon, for many of us, is about a realization. It shouldn't be about a realization in a way, because it's a new moon. But this new moon is different, and we realize we're in a final chapter. And perhaps this realization now, with the moon, moon in Scorpio and the Sun in Scorpio, is quite intense. It's working on a fairly emotional level. And Scorpios, they know. And remember that Scorpios know in a different way than the fire signs. It's sometimes easy to mix up a fire sign and a water sign. I mean, it might seem an obvious thing to say, that the sun and the fire and water are different, but in terms of the words one uses to describe the fire signs and the water signs, one might get mixed up. One might, for example, use the word intuitive. One might use the word sensitive, and one might even use the words intuitive and sensitive as interchangeable. They're not interchangeable. Scorpio is a sensitive sign. I would not have said, all things being equal, it is an intuitive sign. But anyway, I'll be talking about that at a later stage. Now, the moon is now moving in late Scorpio, and that means it's out of the Via Combusta, and it is making conjunctions to Mercury and Mars. So I've talked about the Mercury-Mars conjunction at some length earlier in the week, and I've said the usual things. Mercury-Mars conjunction It can be quite combative, verbally combative. It wants to express its ideas. It's got definite thoughts about the way things should work, and it's perhaps not afraid of raising its voice, although this Mercury-Mars conjunction is in Scorpio, so that does sort of downplay the conjunction a bit, but it represents strong thoughts and perhaps acting quickly as a result of our thoughts. I mean, in my video for yesterday, I described a road rage incident where there was an altercation in Arkansas where one person shot another person, and that might be an example of how Mercury-Mars works. I mean, an extreme example, of course, but now we've got Moon making a conjunction to Mercury and Mars. It's as if the Mercury-Mars conjunction is reforming. It was separating, it is separating, but the Moon kind of brings it all together. And when you've got Moon conjunct Mercury, Moon conjunct Mars, you do think of communication. You think of very powerful communication. Moon and Mercury are, as I like to say, the two communication planets. And so we feel we've got something to say. The question now is, how do we say it? There are many ways of expressing ourselves, and sometimes the obvious way, doesn't necessarily work. So a lot of stuff in Scorpio, and we kind of have a Grand Trine in water signs. So we have the Moon making a trine to Jupiter, making a trine to Saturn, and Moon also making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith. So that Grand Trine does really suggest that emotions are flowing. People have strong feelings, and one feeling merges into another feeling. And when you've got Moon conjunct Mars, people might act on the basis of their emotions, and it might be very easy for them to act with that Grand Trine in water signs. Although sometimes Grand Trines in water signs can be a bit lazy. They can sort of float around. I've got a Grand Trine in water signs. Sometimes I can just get caught in my own dreams and thoughts and fantasies, and nothing happens, and there could be years of inaction. And that is a way in which Grand Trines in water signs can work. And as far as elemental balance is concerned, I think there's something interesting going on, because if you take an elemental balance, how do you decide on an elemental balance in a chart? Well, you look at the 7 traditional planets. You don't include Uranus, Neptune and Pluto in your calculations of an elemental balance. At least that is my approach, because Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are generational planets. And so we notice that there are no less than 6 planets, 6 traditional planets are in water signs, and 1 planet is in an air sign. There are no traditional planets in fire signs. There are no traditional planets in earth signs. In fact, even if you include Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, there are no planets there. So this complete lack of fire and earth is quite incredible. So what does that mean? I think that it might mean that we find it very difficult to make connections. These these 2 elements, fire and earth, are about making connections in completely different ways, of course. Fire is about intuition. It's about just connecting us and the universe, and it all comes together very, very quickly. It's about knowledge. It's about knowing that something is the case, because you don't have to work it out. Then as far as earth, is that about intuition? Kind of. It's about just seeing one detail, another detail, looking at the material world. You don't have to do any processing, and that's the key thing. Not much processing involved for the fire signs and the earth signs. Things are immediately obvious. But today we've got 6 planets in water signs, 1 planet in air sign. I'm only counting the traditional planets. I'm not counting Uranus, Neptune and Pluto in that count. And so Okay, we've got a representative of an air sign. We've got Venus in Libra. But we have to do a lot of processing here. We have to use emotional processing, mainly emotional processing, a bit of mental processing because of that Venus in Libra. But it does take a bit of time. So, right now, there is something about the astrological position which I would have said was, quite extreme. Now, turning to the position in Sydney, Australia, at noon, the sun is at 29:53 Libra. So for the first part of the day into the sort of late afternoon, the sun is in Libra. So you don't quite have that Scorpio emphasis, at least to begin with. But eventually the sun moves into Scorpio, and you get the full blast of this sign. Now, turning to the heliocentric view, so here is the heliocentric picture with the sun at the center of the solar system. You can see that the Earth is in Taurus. Absolutely has to be in Taurus because the Earth is always opposition the sun. So that's one change. And Neptune is at the beginning of Aries. Don't forget, heliocentric chart, you don't get retrogrades. So Neptune is just going to stay in Aries. It doesn't go backwards into Pisces. So with the sun making a semi-sextile to Neptune, it could be a day that is somewhat confusing. And the sun is kind of on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint as well. So Uranus, sun is sort of semi-sextile Uranus, sort of semi-sextile Neptune, and so there may be moments of confusion where things don't make immediate sense, and we just need to be used to that fact, and we shouldn't feel that anything is particularly obvious. We would like things to be obvious, but they're not. And there may be moments with sun on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint where we just lose focus and we sort of flip into another state of being. I mean, temporarily, maybe for a split second, and that can add to the confusion. But it's not just about confusion, it's about perhaps being able to feel the way things are. Remembering that geocentrically we've got a lot of planets in Scorpio. So now I'm going to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, October the 23rd, 2025. Aries, things continue. The situation perhaps gets more intense because the sun is moving into Scorpio. So we've now got 4 planets in Scorpio, and as I was just saying, there are no planets in fire signs, and only 1 planet in air signs if you only use the traditional planets. So you do have to use a different mode of being. Do be ready to use your feelings. You can't just do the first thing that comes to mind. It would be nice, Aries, if you were able to take some dramatic initiative, but I just don't think it's going to be possible. I don't think you're going to find the right situation, and you just might not have the energy. I mean, Aries is a high energy sign, and normally that energy is available, but right now it's not. And Aries, I think that's probably a good thing. You have to understand the cycles. Things change. You can't always be in the forefront of things, and there will be times when you just want to relax, not feel that you have to do anything. But then there's the question of how relaxing is today going to be. There's a lot on your mind. There's a lot to think about. And there's a lot to perhaps get annoyed about because, one aspect that we do have today is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars. So when you hear Moon-Mars conjunction, you think about something perhaps going on an emotional level. Things might be quite intense, you being quite intense, and you getting annoyed about things. And that's another contradiction of today. You get annoyed, you have strong feelings, but do you actually have the opportunity to do anything with these feelings? Yeah, it would be nice to lash out, perhaps. It would be nice to tell people exactly what you thought, and maybe you can, but it's nothing trivial. So if you are going to get annoyed, if you're going to be really open about your feelings, you've got to do it properly. It's not a time for half measures. If you can't be fully open, then keep quiet, because if you show a little bit of anger, a little bit of annoyance, it's going to be worse than useless. You'll just be stirring things up, and the overall situation will just feel very unsatisfactory. So there may be moments, Aries, where you have to have a blast of emotion, where you really have to tell someone how you feel. But it's a question is, can you continue with it? Can you play this emotional act? I'm not saying it's an act, but it's tough trying to be in a mode that isn't really you. And there may be other frustrations. One frustration might be technical. There might be just things you would like to be doing. You have ideas about what you want to be doing, and as far as you're concerned, you should be able to do it. I mean, you're still an Aries. You have a right to do whatever you like within reason, but there can be constraints. There could be legal constraints. There could be social constraints, and that could be annoying. Why should anyone tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing? I mean, it kind of depends on where you're living. This might particularly be the case if you're living somewhere where there are annoying rules. For example, I don't know. In the UK, you've got to have I think you've got to have a television license. Haven't you? Yeah, you've got to have a television license. I mean, the last time I was living in the UK on my own, I didn't have a television. Well, I'm not an Aries. I have a moon in Aries, but I didn't have a television, and I refused to buy a television license. And despite the fact that I would get letters just every week telling me to buy a television license, telling me, "Do you know you're breaking the law? You do not have a license." The assumption was I had a television. I didn't have a television. I think during my time, that particular part of my life, I listened to the radio a lot, and this was before the internet. So one doesn't really need a television. But it just shows what the UK is like. But there may be other places where there are petty restrictions that you find to be really annoying. Some of these restrictions might be worthwhile, they might be useful, they might be important, but still, as an Aries, you do find it annoying. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. It's possible, Aries, that you are on the other side of things, that you are quite into other people following the rules. You know the rules. I mean, you might hate the rules, but you know the rules, and it might be a day when you can really sort of demonstrate this knowledge. And finally, there's relationships. A planet that kind of stands out is Venus in Libra. I mean, I know that Uranus and Pluto are in air signs, but I don't really count Uranus and Pluto as being air signs. When I'm making elemental balances, you could say, well, Venus is the only traditional planet in an air sign. And so it's having to do quite a lot of work. And Venus is in Libra, it is in your opposite sign. And Venus might represent another person, someone who is kind of standing there, almost in contrast to everything else going on in your life. They don't entirely make sense. They have a different view, a view that is perhaps more reasonable than your own view. And right now you might be tempted to ignore this influence, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think that there is another person out there who can make things easier, and perhaps they can calm you down in some respects. Taurus, a lot of planets in Scorpio. The Sun is now moving into Scorpio, and wherever you are, even if you're in Australia and New Zealand, by the late afternoon, the Sun will be moving into Scorpio. So Taurus, this does matter, because we got a lot of planets in your opposite sign, and this might mean that you have to spend some time taking other people into consideration. This is a situation which has been building up. We had sort of Mercury and Mars moving into Scorpio, then the moon moved into Scorpio, and now the Sun is there. So it is a day when you may be aware that you don't necessarily have all the power in the world. You'd like to be making your own decisions, but if you make your own decisions without reference to other people, indeed without reference to society, then these decisions could be unusual and unsupported, and in the end they might not work. So Taurus, it's important that you do make an effort to understand, and you're honest. You're honest about who has the power. You have some power, but you don't have perhaps all the power you'd like. And it is a time, Taurus, for looking at that balance and recognizing your own weaknesses. It is a strength to know your own weaknesses, because if you know your own weaknesses, firstly you can negotiate things to make sure that you don't get involved in losing battles, and also there is scope for self-improvement. If you see you've got weak points, then you can work on building them up. But today, Thursday, I'm not convinced that there is a great deal you can do. So that's looking at this Scorpio emphasis in a negative way. There is certainly a positive way of looking at it. It does mean that if you are sufficiently accommodating, that you can get support from other people, and perhaps it's something of a relief not having to make all the decisions. Other people have their own ideas, there are things they want to do, and if you follow their lead up to a point, it could just save yourself a lot of effort, a lot of trouble. But aside from that, if we look at relationships, there could be something about you that sees things in a rather tragic way. I'm not saying there is any tragedy, by the way. I'm just saying that when you look at all of the people around you, and you have to. With all these planets in Scorpio, you might nonetheless be aware of how fleeting everything is. You can get close to someone, you can enjoy someone's company, but before you know it, they've gone. And balancing the idea of closeness and departure, even closeness and death. There is a death-like vibe here. Again, I'm not trying to frighten you. Death is something that we all think about. At least I think about it a lot, because I've got Taurus rising, and death is kind of with us, and it might not be sort of literal death, but it's just a realization that things don't last forever, and perhaps the closer you are to someone, the more you are aware that things don't last forever. So there could be a sadness there, and there could be a tragedy there, but there could also be something quite magnificent about it. You know, you just understanding the way things go, the way things move, you know, quite naturally, and you know, it seems fitting. But it's happening at this time, you know, when you've got all these planets in Scorpio. Scorpio is a sign that really does know how short life is, and Taurus to an extent as well. I mean, Taurus is quite earthy about it. You know, as a Taurus, you understand that you are born of a material world, but things change, bodies get older, people get older, and we all sort of reintegrate with the earth. And you know, maybe if you believe in reincarnation, you're aware of the cycle, and you know, that is what Scorpio is all about. And you know, I know you're not a Scorpio, but you could argue that, you know, we categorize everyone in terms of 12 signs. Maybe we should just categorize people in terms of 6 axes. And the axis you are on is the Taurus Scorpio axis. And so this, perhaps with all these planets in Scorpio, gives you an opportunity to understand the part of yourself that you're least aware of, but it's with you all the time. And it's getting in touch with that inner Scorpio. And you know, with Scorpio, you know, you do think about the mysteries of life and death, and maybe that is something close to you at the moment. Gemini, a big concentration of planets right now in Scorpio, and it's perhaps not really what you wanted, because Gemini and Scorpio are 2 signs that really don't have much in common. And you know, Gemini is earth. Gemini is air. It's positive. It's mutable. Scorpio is water, negative, fixed. Everything, in a way, everything that Gemini is not. And you know, with these planets in Scorpio, you're perhaps having to get into a mode of being that, yeah, you're not fully comfortable with, but maybe you're getting used to it, because you know, it's not really just that the sun has going into Scorpio. It's the fact that Mercury has been in Scorpio for some time, so you're almost getting used to the Mercury being in Scorpio. And you know, Mercury, it does represent you, and perhaps now you're accepting that there is another way of looking at things, another way of being, having to perhaps, you know, be more down to earth, and making sure that everything by and large is in order. And that's not something that Gemini always wants to worry about. You know, you can allow things to slip, you can allow things to perhaps disintegrate into chaos, but now with Mercury in Scorpio, you know that you have to hold on to things. If you allow things to slip, if you allow the chaos to just build up, then you could be overwhelmed by it. And perhaps with all these planets in Scorpio, you know, you're having a chance to really, you know, get yourself together. And you know, additionally, Scorpio is a sign that is connected with life and death, decay, aging. And okay, it's not the body, but it's perhaps an awareness of what the body is doing. And you know, there may be for you, Gemini, a link here with health. And you know, sometimes, you know, Geminis can be just completely disconnected with their bodies. They can also be disconnected, you know, with their own feelings. I've heard it say that Gemini is a somewhat schizoid sign. I'm a Gemini, don't forget, so perhaps I'm describing myself. And what does one mean by schizoid? It's not the same as schizophrenic, by the way. Schizoid, as I understand it, perhaps in layman's terms, is you know, the mind acting perhaps autonomously, perhaps observing its own feelings. There's almost this sort of split between the mind and the heart. And now, perhaps, Gemini, you're having to confront this. There may be emotional realities you're having to dealing with the realities of your own emotions, and also perhaps being aware of the linkage between the psychological and the physical, that if you lose control of your emotions, if you don't take into account your emotional good health, then your physical good health could suffer. So perhaps you should take advantage, of all these planets in Scorpio, and use the opportunity to really think about your health in general at all levels, and what can you do to make things better. Even if you're feeling great, you could still make the improvement. And while you're feeling great, that is the perfect time to make the changes. Now, one aspect we do have today is a conjunction between the Moon and Mercury. We've also got a conjunction between the Moon and Mars, and this Moon-Mercury conjunction is it's quite a fluent communicator. It may be Gemini, that you can say things or communicate things which in the past might have been difficult. So perhaps, Gemini, you want to gently bring up difficult and sensitive subjects. You may have been delaying it, but now might be the time. You can be very subtle. And again, Gemini, not normally known for being an especially subtle sign, but right now you have sufficient sensitivity to create the right environment, to sort of create the right vibe in which things really are possible. So Gemini, it's a sensitive day. It's a day when you might not feel that you are your normal happy-go-lucky self, but at the same time you do have a definite maturity, and additionally you seem to understand the natural law, the natural way of things, the way things should be going. And because of that, Gemini, I think it's unlikely that you're going to make many mistakes. Maybe today you won't make any mistakes at all, because you will just know how to behave. You'll know what to do. You'll know what you can get away with. Cancer. We have at the moment, Cancer, a huge amount of planets in water signs. I mean, it's almost as good as it gets. We have 6 planets in water signs. When I say 6 planets, I'm talking about the traditional planets. I'm not counting Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, although Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, we have got, if we counted Neptune, of course we would have 7 planets in water signs, but 7 planets if you want to count Neptune. So that is a lot of water, and for many of us that could be too much water, but you're a Cancer and you're a water sign, and so with this water emphasis, I think that you're going to feel pretty good. You are very much in the right place. You are at the center of things. There's no confusion, and you're perhaps helped by other people's confusion. Other people might not know what's going on. It's just a lot of emotion flying around. But Cancer, all of it is something that you're able to deal with, and additionally it's something that you can enjoy. You can, this is a time in general, Cancer, for you to enjoy yourself. And enjoy yourself, I'm not talking about anything trivial. I'm talking about enjoying things which are absolutely fundamental to yourself. And don't be ashamed. If something is important to you, it's important to your identity, then give it everything you've got. And what you're dealing with is of course your raw creativity. Whatever that creativity is, you've got to give it the best. You've got to give it your best shot. especially now that we've effectively got a Grand Trine in water signs. So, we got Moon conjunct Mercury and Mars, we've got Moon, Mercury, Mars, trine Jupiter, Moon's trine Saturn. So, it's all coming together. And if something is working well, then it can work even better. And so this is not a time for worrying about what impact you're having, worrying about social pressure, what other people are thinking. It really doesn't matter. And at the same time, I think that you're in accord with everything. You're at one with everything. You are able to just go with the flow. And this Grand Trine. Well, the Grand Trine, it involves the Moon, Jupiter, and Saturn. I don't think the Jupiter-Saturn trine, it happens sort of fairly late in the day, but it comes together. So with this Grand Trine involving Jupiter and Saturn, that means that you're accord, not just with your immediate environment, but with the world at large, with whatever is happening in this complicated world of ours, and you just get it. You just understand, and this means that potentially Cancer, of all the 12 signs, you could be one of the most powerful and also one of the best informed. And being well informed, it's not just about the facts. It's not just about reading the newspapers. It's about being well informed on an emotional level. You just absolutely understand the world in which you're living. So that means you're likely to be able to get things right. And so if you want to talk about it, if you want to tell people about your insights, then I certainly think you can. I mean, after all, the Moon is making a conjunction to Mercury. It's also making a conjunction to Mars. And this Moon, Mars, Mercury conjunction does allow you to speak freely. And I think that there are few things you can't discuss. I mean, the Moon is making a conjunction also to true Black Moon Lilith. So, maybe Cancer, you can start to talk about things that are usually quite difficult, subjects that other people don't bring up, that they don't usually want to talk about. But today you can talk about them. You can talk about things which may be usually unacceptable, but you know how to behave. You know how to deal with the complicated emotional currents that are all around us. I mean, I say complicated from the perspective of a non-Cancerian. I mean, from a Cancerian perspective, it's all very straightforward. So, Cancer, I think that it can be a really good day, and most importantly, you are aligned. You are aligned with our planet. You are aligned with what's going on. You know in which way things are going to develop. Leo, we have to track the sun when we're talking about the Leo horoscope. I mean, after all, the sun is your ruler, and the sun is moving into Scorpio, so that is a change. So the sun was in Libra, and it's moving into Scorpio. Is that a good thing? Well, in one sense, it is certainly a good thing, and that is because the sun in Libra is in its detriment. We don't normally think about the sun in Libra being in its detriment, but the reality is that all things being equal, Libra is the worst sign for the sun to be in. I mean, all things being equal. And that might sound a strange thing to say because all signs are equal, but from a strict traditional perspective, because the sun is in its detriment in Libra, it's not great. Libra is a planet of having to think about other people, for example, having to think about outside pressures, and so you can see how sun in Libra doesn't always work. Now, that doesn't mean to say that people with sun in Libra are unlucky. I mean, There are some very, very powerful people who have their sun in Libra. But with the sun moving out of Libra, you could say that straight away you get stronger. You feel better about yourself. You feel, better able to deal with, with the world and its challenges, and you know how to respond. And how do you respond? Leos may be responding in a way that isn't typically Leo. I think that Leo, you understand the importance of security, making sure that you are, well looked after. And who can you trust? Well, you can certainly trust yourself, and maybe you can trust your family, but you don't want to do anything that is, too out of character, too strange. The unfamiliar is not something you really, want to get involved with. And it's not just about the sun in Leo. It's the fact that we've got 4 planets. Sorry, sun is not in Leo. The sun is now in Scorpio. It's not just about the sun in Scorpio. It's about the fact that we have now got 4 planets in Scorpio, and those planets in Scorpio, in a positive way, they're really anchoring you. They are, tying you to the ground. I mean, it might be somewhat boring, but as far as you're concerned, it's for the best. You don't want too much excitement, and you're going to be happiest when you're in familiar surroundings. Now, that doesn't mean to say that nothing is going on, and maybe the challenge, Leo, here is to find a safe space for yourself, and from the vantage point of that safety, you can start to take action. You can start to do things. For example, you can reach out without necessarily going anywhere. That is the great thing, about the internet and telephones. You don't have to compromise yourself to take the initiative. You don't have to take risks. And if you're somewhere safe and secure, you're going to be really a very good communicator. You'll be able to talk very naturally and confidently. And the reason you're able to speak confidently is because you feel safe. And that should always be your goal today. Feeling as safe as possible, feeling as comfortable as possible. And that may even relate to the exact space you're in, moving from one space to another, finding your spot. Well, that is a concept from Carlos Castaneda, and was it the teachings of Don Juan? And so there is this concept in that book, I don't know if you've read it or not, where he talks about having to find the right spot. You have to be somewhere. You have to be exactly in the right place. You have to actually adopt the right position. And once you have found that position, that exact position, then nothing can hurt you. And of course, when we're dealing with Carlos Castaneda, we're talking, and the teachings of Don Juan, we're talking about dreams, fantasies, nightmares, these things that threaten to sort of take you over the brink, and it's all incredibly scary. But if you're in the right place, if you found your spot, nothing can hurt you. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to be a nightmarish day, but I am suggesting, Leo, that there may be a place where you feel absolutely comfortable. It may be, for example, sitting in one chair rather than another chair. It could be, having, I don't know, your arms folded, your arms not folded. But there's some position where you're going to feel great, where you're going to feel that nothing can touch you. I don't think anything can touch you. But what we need, Leo, is for you to feel as good as possible. Because once you're in that position, then you can start to really make things happen. You can be invisible, but at the same time be everywhere. With that, Moon making a conjunction to sort of Mercury, Moon making a conjunction to Mars, your presence is clear. You can make your presence clear, on the other side of the world. So there is real strength today for you, Leo, but you've got to find it. It won't necessarily be obvious, and it's certainly not a time to be going anywhere, I don't think. So as far as possible, don't go anywhere, because why would you want to do that? Well, unless you're going somewhere that you're completely familiar with. If you're moving to familiar ground, well, that's great, but you certainly shouldn't be going anywhere where you don't know where you're going. It's moving into strange territory. That's not what you want to do. Virgo. There is a strange situation at the moment, Virgo, that we don't just have no planets in earth signs, but we also have no planets in fire signs. And this lack of balance, there is a real lack of balance here. Most of the planets are in water signs. And I think that this lack of balance could affect you. It could make you feel uneasy, and it might just be difficult to understand what's going on. I mean, you know that things are going on, and it's absolutely clear, but actually making sense of it all, that could be really hard. And you try, you try as hard as you can to understand the implications of something, and you're trying to find some wider scheme, but it's hard work. In fact, it might be impossible. So perhaps, Virgo, you should accept that you don't understand, and that is a difficult place to be. But there are times when we just don't understand, where things are unfolding which are just completely beyond us. And what do you do? Well, you can still ask questions. You can try to understand. So if you want to get hold of information, for example, then I think that is something that you very much can do. I mean, there is a conjunction between the moon and Mercury, also a conjunction between the moon and Mars. So we had a conjunction between Mercury and Mars at the beginning of the week, and this Mercury-Mars conjunction has kind of reformed thanks to the moon. So the moon, because it's conjunct Mercury and Mars, it's bringing it all together. And so, Virgo, you are curious, and your curiosity may be very difficult to sate because you're not getting the answers you're looking for. So that might be how you're feeling, that you're always looking for something, and you're not going to find it short term. But the more you can understand, the more you can start to get a picture. Perhaps if you're thinking about a jigsaw puzzle, okay, you can fit some more pieces together. You're not going to get the whole picture. You're not going to complete the puzzle, but you're going to make progress. You still don't know what you're making. You don't know what you're creating. You don't know what. You really don't know what you're doing. But just keep going, and there will be other things that don't make sense. You perhaps don't understand, why people are doing what they're doing, and why people are restricting themselves in a particular way. And this might relate to the law of the land. If you come across laws and rules, it's not going to make any sense. You're going to want to know why. And so being put in this position of not having the answers, Virgo, could be very frustrating. And you might be tempted to force things through. You might think, well, you're going to have to create your own answers. You're going to have to create your own rules, your own solutions. But if you try to do that, I think it could backfire. You might find that you're sort of out on a limb, and you don't want to be out on a limb. So my advice is just to accept the situation as it is, keep asking questions, keep learning. You are making progress, and in the end you will see the full picture, but I don't think that you're going to see the full picture today. Libra, you have a lot of work to do, and the reason you've got a lot of work to do is because Venus, your ruler, it kind of stands out. It's on its own, and that's not necessarily such a bad thing. So to explain this, we need to look at the chart. So I've gone on about the elements, and when I talk about the elements, I'm talking about fire, earth, air, and water, where the planets are, and I don't count Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto when I'm doing elemental balances. And we have right now 6 traditional planets in water signs. I mean, it's 7 traditional planets. If it's 7 planets if you count Neptune, but I'm not counting Neptune for the moment. And so we have 6 traditional planets in water signs, and that means that there's only one traditional planet not in a water sign, and that's Venus in Libra. That's your ruler. And because of that, Libra, you might see what's happening. You might see the way people are behaving, and you might feel alone. And you just have a different view, and you're not being carried along with things, and you might feel that there's something wrong. And Libra, because of who you are, you want to be part of things, you want to be connected, but right now you are not connected, and in a way you are different, you are an individual. And this might be something to actually welcome. Okay, it might not be comfortable, but perhaps it's important. It might be, for example, a situation where everyone wants to do something. Everyone's following the flow. Everyone's going in a particular direction. They're not asking questions. They're just following the bidding of the universe, or perhaps other people who are being manipulating other people's emotions. That is possible. But there's you. You're standing strong. And I know that Libra often has a reputation for being a compromiser, but I don't think today you are a compromiser. You want to do things that are right for you and that are right for the world. And perhaps, Libra, you're just slightly ahead of your time. You know things are changing. Perhaps you're just seeing Neptune going back into Pisces, and Neptune going into Pisces has just caused more chaos, more conformity as well. And right now, conformity is not what it's about as far as you are concerned, and it could be somewhat distressing, and maybe not distressing. You could just regard the whole thing as being a bit of a pity. It's a pity because pity. I don't think I've never used that word pity in any of my videos. I've been doing these videos for nearly 3 years, and I haven't used that word pity before. I don't think it's a word I use very much, but you might think that it is all a pity. It's a pity that people are thinking the way they are. It's a pity that they're behaving like they are. It's a pity that they're not being individuals. But it's not your problem, and at least you are not infected by the overall swirl of emotion and irrationality. You're not. I mean, irrationality, of course, I mean irrationality in a sort of in a non-technical sense of the word. I mean, in another sense, you could say, even in a philosophical sense, at the moment things are, extremely rational, because from a Jungian perspective, water is a rational element, and what Jung meant by rationality, I think, is using our thoughts and our feelings to make up our own minds. But that's not the same as looking at the objective facts. People are not looking at the objective facts. They're not observing, they're not acting on what's actually going on in the world. They're frankly acting on their own prejudices, and you're not prejudiced. You are separate from it all, and that does give you a special position, and maybe it gives you a position of responsibility, and perhaps you're going to need a certain amount of courage, but you can only take courage too far, and it just may be that you recognize that certain people that you thought were better are kind of letting a side down. They're showing their weaknesses, and that is sad, but it's good to know. It's good to know what other people are really like. Scorpio. Well, it's all happening now. This is as good as it gets. This is as many planets in Scorpio as you are going to get this year. And we have got 4 planets in Scorpio: Sun, Mars, Mercury and Moon. So that is really a massive concentration in your sign. And it does put a lot of emphasis on you. You are someone who can make things happen, and perhaps people are looking to you for leadership. We are living in confusing times. Who understands what's going on? Well, maybe Scorpio understands what's going on. You may not be able to describe what's going on, but on an emotional level, you get it. And now that the sun is in your sign, you have the power, and it can be a very concentrated power. So the question is, Scorpio, what are you going to do with it? Just because you've got something doesn't mean anything is going to happen. So you have got perhaps to decide how you want to change things. What would you like the world to be like? What would you like your little part of the world to be like? And if you express your views, I don't think anyone is going to seriously contradict you. After all, the moon is making a conjunction to Mars, conjunction to Mercury. This means that you're going to be able to, I think, communicate with power and conviction, and also authority. Yes, authority. If you want to lay down the law, tell people how things should be, then you can, and you can be quite moralizing about it. You give a clear sense about what is right and wrong. I mean, that is a Scorpio thing. Scorpios can do that. They have a view about what is right, and if things are wrong, if things are immoral, if other people are being treated badly, then Scorpios are quite capable of asserting themselves. They can be quite angry about it as well. But I think at the moment, Scorpio, if you do get angry, you can use that anger in quite an effective way. And you probably don't have to raise your voice. It's your body language, your stare, maybe just the way you're thinking, and the kind of aura you're presenting just really does show that you are serious. So Scorpio, maybe we're talking about a degree of responsibility. You have a responsibility. You have the capacity for leadership. For setting an example, and this means that you've got to think about the wider good. I mean, from a moral perspective, I know that you are quite subjective. You do look at things from your view. your emotional perspective. Okay, I think you've got it right. You understand the way things are moving, but you have to think about the wider good. It is kind of, expected of you. And when you've got all of these planets in Scorpio, like 4 planets in Scorpio, the concentration is so huge that you could quite well get a reflex action. And by reflex action, I'm talking about the opposite sign. So Scorpio can sort of jump into Taurus. Taurus is a sign that represents everything you are not, at least on a conscious level. But on an unconscious level, it perhaps represents everything you are. It perhaps represents the shadow. And it also represents the other. And so Scorpio perhaps needs to be balanced. There is so much focus on yourself and perhaps the way you feel and how important your feelings are, that you could lose touch with reality, and you have to rediscover that reality that could be represented by the sign Taurus. And so something needs to be built. And additionally, Taurus is a sign in the Scorpio chart that can represent relationships, the people in your life. And at some stage you have to consider their needs. You could be overwhelming, but if you are overwhelming to other people, then you're being overwhelming to yourself as well. And you don't want to overwhelm yourself with your own obsession with yourself, because ironically, if you are overwhelmed by yourself, you might lose your sense of self. And so do make a special effort to create that balance. And as far as relationships are concerned, give other people some space. Other people are not really in the mood for fully asserting themselves. They might want to hang back, but they have their own strengths. And if you give people some room to breathe, room to express themselves, I think that would be best. I think it would be the best for everyone, you included. Sagittarius. It's a day that is quite intense. We've got a lot of planets in Scorpio. And, Scorpio is the sign before Sagittarius. So you could say that these planets are getting ready to move into your sign. We've got the sun moving into Scorpio. Okay, the sun won't move into Sagittarius for another month, but, it'll get there in the end. And, likewise, Mercury and Mars in Scorpio getting ready to move into Sagittarius at some stage. It won't be so long, and the moon will be in Sagittarius tomorrow. So things are going to change. Some things are going to change quickly. Some things might take longer. But as far as right now is concerned, this does mean that there's probably not a great deal that you can do. Certainly not a great deal that you need to do, at least in a sort of a direct, overt way. It's better, Sagittarius, if you just hold back. This is a process of change, and you thought that things were happening. Perhaps there were events going on in your social life. So from a social perspective, we just had a new moon, and this new moon was in late Libra, so it might have felt that was a new beginning, and there may have been things going on a social level which seemed interesting. But now that new moon has changed. The sun and the moon used to have the sun and the moon in Libra, but now the sun and the moon are both in Scorpio. So that new moon has transitioned to something completely different, and you're thinking, at least from a social perspective, that there is a change, and the change could well be about a feeling of separation. I think this is something I talked about yesterday, that nothing lasts forever, and you can see people for what they're really like. That's good. But if you can see people for what they're really like, that might mean that you make a few decisions, and it might be just a time to loosen some of your ties with certain people, because you are getting ready for a change. And if you want to make the most of this change, you need to have as much freedom as possible. And what you don't want to have happen is you having the past hold you back, and that would not be good. Some people just don't want to go away, even though you feel quite sure that they have kind of done what they can. They can't be useful anymore, and from now on they could be more of a drag on you for a benefit. So perhaps, Sagittarius, it is a time for serious and realistic thinking. And this has perhaps been the pattern, well, maybe since the summer, ever since Jupiter moved into Cancer. You've been getting used to Jupiter moving into Cancer. That was perhaps a bit of a shock to the system. Jupiter is your ruler. It stays in Cancer until early summer. I think it moves into Leo in June of next year. But while Jupiter is in Cancer, there is an emphasis on the reflective, on the emotional side of things, and that is something you're getting used to. And today, when we have 6 out of 7 of the traditional planets in water signs, and plus we've got Neptune in Pisces as well. When we've got that, then you're now reminded of the change, and you're thinking about how you can manage it. And Jupiter is slowing down, by the way. Jupiter's going to go retrograde quite soon, and so you have an opportunity to think about the new reality, and to be able to tune into your emotions in a way that in the past you hadn't been able to. And it's not always comfortable, but today we do have a Grand Trine in water signs, kind of. We've got the Moon trine Jupiter, we've got the Moon trine Saturn, so a lot of emotions are flowing. And perhaps, Sagittarius, you can benefit from this. You can sort of understand things in a new way. But if you want to understand things in a new way, you have to take a step back. If you are in the center of things, if you are surrounded by other people, then you won't know what's going on. You need distance, and that's the message. And I think deep down you know that is for the best. You know that if you're surrounded by a hectic world, pressures left, right and center, you're not going to be able to function on particularly good form. So Sagittarius, I'm not saying it's a bad day, by the way. I'm actually thinking it could be quite a good day, provided you adopt the right approach and you do focus on the emotional, and you don't feel that you have to do anything right now. And the Moon is, by the way, making a trine to Jupiter. The Moon in Scorpio, trine Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is your ruler, and that does allow you to really understand things in a new way. But I don't think you need anyone else's help. Capricorn, you don't have to do everything on your own. I mean, as a Capricorn, you certainly understand other people's limitations, and they have substantial limitations. You know that, and because of that understanding, you're not going to give people more responsibility than they can handle. And at the moment, with the Sun moving into Scorpio, you have a chance to make the most of other people, and you might be pleasantly surprised over the next few weeks by what people can come up with, what they can achieve. Again, if you give them a chance, and provided you don't have too many expectations. And in terms of of your ambitions. Part of your ambition structure, is changing a bit, with the sun moving out of Libra into Scorpio. You perhaps realize that you can't do everything on your own, and also that your ambitions maybe need to be couched in terms of who you're in contact with, who you're able to socialize with, because you need other people, as I've already said. And at the moment, other people are there, they are forthcoming, and you can create change. So if you find that people are not being cooperative, or they don't really understand your message, or they don't understand what you want of them, I think you can make this clear. You're able to be very definite and very determined, and people will listen if you're prepared to speak up, if you're prepared to assert yourself. Of course, if you do nothing, then you can't expect any response. So Capricorn, don't doubt yourself, and don't doubt your basic sort of charisma. And additionally, the moon in Scorpio is making a trine to Jupiter and Saturn, and so in other words, we have a Grand Trine today, Grand Trine in water signs, and it's a Grand Trine that really should help you out. You might think that certain things are going to be really difficult, particularly on a social level. You might think it's just going to take a huge amount of effort getting people on board, getting people to listen to you. But there's a Grand Trine. The Grand Trine just allows things to move very naturally. So the moon, it first makes a trine to Jupiter. It's like the moon almost picks up Jupiter's influence, and then it moves on to a trine of Saturn. And Saturn is, of course, you. Saturn is your ruling planet. So through other people, and just through the facility of dealing with other people, it just won't be as difficult as you'd imagined. And so things can really happen, things can really move, and if you're feeling unsupported, then you can find that support. It's really easy. If it's something you want, I think you just have to ask. I think that you can really benefit from other people's help, and you don't have to really be too pushy. And this all means that the area of relationships looks pretty constructive. So I don't know how relationships have been in the past, but things can improve, things can just get better. And you might have assumed that you couldn't get through to someone, that they are completely stubborn, they're set in their ways, why should they change? But you shouldn't make those assumptions, and you don't want to create self-fulfilling prophecies. So if you assume that someone is going to be stuck in their ways, is going to behave as they've always behaved, you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. You've got to be imaginative, and you've got to be positive. Think about what people can do if you give them a chance, if you give them some prompting. And so Capricorn, I believe that it's a day when you should be focusing on the social and interpersonal dimension. I think that this is an area of growth. But if you are alone, if there's no one that interests you, if you're living in the middle of nowhere, still, it's going to be a good day. And it's going to be a good day because that energy, which could have been focused on the social side of things, will be focused on something else. It will be focused on how you perceive not just your ambitions, not ambitions in a short-term way, but how you perceive your longer-term goals. What kind of future do you really want for yourself? And I know that you've got a very good idea. I assume you've got a fairly good idea about what your future should be like. But events may take place over the course of the day, not just today, maybe over the next few weeks even. But today is particularly strong now that we've got the sun and the moon in Scorpio. But it might be the beginning of a time when you start to see what it's all about, what you are all about. It doesn't really matter how old you are. There's still something that you need to do, something that you need to get together. And yeah, and it is about the future, and what your hopes are for the future. And whatever these hopes for the future, you can do something right now to make it much more likely that your hopes are going to be realized. And remember, hope goes beyond ambition. Ambition is something quite short term, it's quite mundane, but hope goes beyond that. Aquarius. I don't want to repeat myself, but maybe I will. And the issue we have, Aquarius, is that we have a lot of planets in Scorpio. We've just got the Sun moving into Scorpio. So got 4 planets in Scorpio, 4 planets in that critical angle in your chart that I have been talking about for the last week. So, Scorpio is a sign that does relate to your ambitions. And so with 4 planets in Scorpio, Aquarius, that might indicate that it is a time when there are things that you want to achieve, or maybe even just one thing that you want to achieve. So there is a single pointedness today, just you deciding what's important and giving it everything you've got, and also finding that things move really quickly, they move really well. You don't need a lot of effort. We have a Grand Trine in water signs. We've got the moon in Scorpio, it's making a trine to Jupiter. We've got Mercury making a trine to Jupiter. We've got the moon making a trine to Saturn. And of course, Saturn is your ruler. So, whatever it is you want, and what you want may be quite material. Whatever it is you want, it's going to be much easier than you realize to get it. You don't have to put in too much energy, and that is the nature of the Grand Trine in water signs. Now, that might mean that you have got to be accepting of water, the concept of water. I mean, water, it is an element which is emotional, and of course Aquarius has a reputation for being somewhat unemotional. I'm sure that's an exaggeration, but the emotional side of things, well, that's not normally how you work, all things being equal. Aquarius tends to be more about the mind and the intellect, and the emotional side can sometimes be neglected. But right now, with 6 traditional planets in water signs, the emotional side of things is the way forward. It's the way to get results. And so, do listen to your feelings, even when it comes to your own ambitions. Ambition and emotion are not 2 things that are necessarily disconnected. And you might have a strong feeling about, the way things should be going. The sign water is very often about people being successful. Now, that might sound strange, but if you think about it, water is about knowing what people are thinking, what people are craving. It's being able to, in a commercial sense, satisfy a demand. How do you know what that demand is? How do you anticipate a demand before it happens? Well, you perhaps use your feelings. So if you are involved in any kind of business, or you're working today, then really use that concentration in Scorpio. And Scorpio is about desire, and Aquarius, there are things that I think you do desire, and it might seem irrational, but Aquarius, if you really want something, you can get it. And at the same time, Aquarius, you can bring to bear really huge amounts of power. And just make sure that you're single-pointed about it. You don't want to diffuse that power, have too many aims, too many goals. You've got to decide what really matters to you, and then pursue it, with everything you've got. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, the Sun is changing sign. The Sun is ruler of Leo, your opposite sign. So the Sun moving out of Libra into Scorpio might say something about another person and how they change. And it could be that someone becomes more emotional, more focused. Perhaps someone in your life had been a bit vague, they hadn't been very sure of themselves, they'd perhaps wanted to sit on the fence, and now that Sun is moving into Scorpio, they could become more focused, perhaps more in line with the way you feel, and they may be very clear about what they want. And so that is something you need to take on board. Now, this person could additionally relate to your ambitions. It may not be a partner or a spouse, it just could be someone else who is very ambitious, and they definitely want things, and they might seem to be a rival, but someone who could be a rival could also be an ally if you make the effort to understand what makes them tick. Pisces, you are a water sign, and there is an exceptional amount of water at the moment. There really is. 6 of the traditional 7 planets are in water signs. Of course, you've got Saturn now. Saturn and Neptune are in water signs, and being a Pisces, the water element is you. And you could say that with 6 out of 7 traditional planets, plus Neptune as well in Pisces, that means that you are really in your own element, literally. There are a few things right now that you don't understand. You absolutely get it, and this means that you can be at the center of things, and you just understand what's going on, and you should make a special effort to understand what's going on, because there are things going on in the world which not all of us understand, but you do get it, you do understand, and because you understand, well, that can make life easier, because no one likes mysteries. And, well, okay, mysteries might seem fascinating up to a point, but if those mysteries involve us or threaten to involve us, we want to know what's going on. And a Pisces, I think you really do get it. And with 4 planets in Scorpio, you're able to get a broader view. A lot of people don't have a broader view. They're just dealing with one event after another, and it all seems very disconnected. It's because they're at a fairly low level. They're looking at the ground. You Pisces are not looking at the ground. You're able to see the whole thing. And these Scorpio planets, they're involved in a Grand Trine, because we've got Grand Trine in water signs, Moon in Scorpio, Trine Jupiter, Trine Saturn. Yeah, Trine Jupiter. Jupiter is your ruler. So this Grand Trine, it just makes things so easy for you. Things just flow, and you have good connections with everything. So if you have any psychic abilities, as many Pisceans do have psychic abilities, at least the textbook Pisces is quite psychic. I don't know how that turns out in reality, but if you have psychic abilities, then those psychic abilities are going to be intensified. It's just going to be so easy to pick things up. Of course, the problem with picking things up, people's feelings, their thoughts, it can just be all too much of a good thing. You can pick up so much information that you could be overwhelmed, and that might be the downside of this Grand Trine in water signs. Grand Trines can run too fast. They can provide too much information. They can get us very confused, and we can end up in a situation where we just don't know what's going on. So Pisces, remember what your opposite sign is. Remember, Virgo is your opposite sign. I know you're not a Virgo, but there may be certain qualities of a Virgo that could be useful, even though the South Node is in Virgo. And the quality I'm thinking about in particular is the ability to decide what is what, separate the wheat from the chaff. So there could be just so much information coming in, you just don't know what's going on. So you have to decide what's important, and what can be just discarded. So that does matter up to a point, but it shouldn't take away from the fact that Pisces, right now you have a complete ability to understand, what is happening, and whether that's at a sort of a higher level, the collective level, or at a personal level. So if you're dealing with people on a one-to-one level, with the moon making a conjunction to Mercury, you have the ability to, understand what they're trying to say, what their aspirations are, and that could be important. If you understand what is important to another person, then you can win their friendship, support and loyalty very quickly. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And so it is now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 58, which is the joyous. This is completely appropriate. The joyous represents the lake over the lake. So if you look at the trigram of the joyous, you have the two trigrams. You see a repetition here. And this upper trigram represents a lake. So we've got a lake over a lake. So the joyous is a very watery hexagram. It is about flow. It is about people enjoying themselves, people getting caught up in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is really very emotional. And, on the surface, it certainly seems to be a great hexagram. You think about, having a party, enjoying yourself, not having to think too much of responsibility. But the problem with the joyous is that we could get caught up in things. We could get caught up in the flow, what other people are doing, where other people are pushing us. And yeah, it's great fun, but we might lose touch with reality. And that is a real possibility. And instead, we have to be aware. We have to have one eye open, just watching how things are developed, making sure that we are never losing touch with things, because it's so easy to do that. And remember, it's not just the fact that we've got 6 planets in water signs. We've got a Grand Trine in water, Moon, Jupiter and Saturn. Yeah, so things flow. They're joyous, but one lake flows into another lake, and we could get overwhelmed. We don't notice that the tide is coming in, and if we're not careful, we could be swept off our feet, and that would be a disaster. So we do need to know what's going on, and we have the bottom line moving, and we have the second from the bottom moving, and we know with the bottom line moving, that does indicate a high level of harmony. We are able to relate to what is going on. We're able to fit in with it all, and it all feels very easy, and we get on with people, we understand people, and it is quite joyous. But then the second line moves, and when the second line is not, it's not unfortunate, but it is asking us to have sincerity. We've got to be very clear about what is important. There is a danger with the second line that we do get overwhelmed, that we just get caught up in the merrymaking, but we're not going to do it. I think that's not what the I Ching says will happen. I think the I Ching is suggesting that because of our sincerity, because of our understanding of what is important, we will be able to keep control, and we're not going to lose touch with reality. So we are able to work within limits. We can enjoy ourselves, but up to a point, and we're going to know when to stop, and we're going to be very aware of our responsibilities. And because we got two lines moving, that means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram 45, which is gathering together, and it's kind of more of the same. And the joyous as a hexagram was about just becoming part of things, enjoying oneself. 45, gathering together. Other people are there. If we need support, then we can get support. We don't have to do things on our own, and that is really helped by the fact that we've got a Grand Trine in water signs, Moon, Jupiter and Saturn. Although we should respect the I Ching, this is an independent oracle. It's not impacted by the astrology, but it kind of, the astrology and I Ching perhaps both reflect the same thing. So correlation is not causation. And so your gathering together gives us an opportunity to come together with right-minded people, perhaps coming together with some sort of common purpose. And even if we're not connected with other people, we can gather ourselves together, and we can gather everything we are together, and feel that we are very much on the right track, and we are moving in the right direction. So I want to finish by talking about the sun in Scorpio. And I have to say something about the sun in Scorpio. I mean that Scorpio is a sign which probably gets more attention than other signs. Maybe. I mean, I don't really have anything in Scorpio in my chart. I mean, I have Neptune in Scorpio, but that's it. Although it's true that both my parents were Scorpios, and my brother's a Scorpio, and my sister's a Scorpio, and my mother, brother, and sister are all born on the same day. But so I have some kind of indirect familiarity with Scorpio, but I'm not a Scorpio myself. And so as far as the moment that the sun moves into Scorpio, where it is here. So Scorpio, why does Scorpio get so much attention? You hear about sort of Scorpio rising. You don't say Leo rising, Virgo rising. Scorpio rising, for example, has a sort of a mystery and an attractiveness that just other rising signs don't have. I'm just not quite sure why that is. So Scorpio, is a sign that somehow has a special niche, and so with the sun moving into Scorpio, here it is. The sun moves into Scorpio today at 4:51 a.m. London time, and so that would be sort of late in the evening from the perspective of the Americas, late afternoon from the perspective of Australia and New Zealand. And so how are things going to change? Well, it's going to be it's difficult to say why this sun in Scorpio in itself is particularly important. Whether it's really connected with the sun moving into Scorpio, or whether it's just connected with the overall elemental balance of as I've said on numerous occasions, when the sun moves into Scorpio, that means that we have 6 traditional planets in water signs. So much water, so much emotion, so much flow. And at the same time, we've got a Grand Trine in water signs, because the moon is in Scorpio, and it's making a trine to Jupiter and Saturn. So this is a time of intensity, when people are taking themselves incredibly seriously. And that is the nature of Scorpio. I mean, Scorpio is a fixed sign, and once it gets into a particular groove, it just tends to just stay there. And yeah, it's a water sign, so Scorpio has the capacity to sort of hanging on to feelings for a long period of time. So that might be something that we experience. Once people have a feeling, they just stick with it, and things just don't change. And as far as Scorpio is concerned, it has the reputation for extremes of good and evil. In terms of the good, Scorpios can really feel other people's pain. I mean, that is something that is said about Scorpios. And if someone is suffering, or some group of people are suffering, Scorpio is going to want to do something about it. If depends on the kind of Scorpio they are. That some Scorpios will just give everything, in certain cases, including their lives, for the sake of ending suffering and standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. So that is certainly a positive sign to Scorpio. And with the sun moving into Scorpio now, it could be a time of compassion where people get overwhelmed by compassion. Now we've got with 6 out of 7 traditional planets in water signs. Maybe that's something that we will notice. People perhaps demonstrating, people expressing political opinions, people getting really, really worked up about what is going on in the world. But Scorpio is a planet of extremes. Scorpio, in certain quarters, has a very bad reputation. It has a reputation as being evil, in the same way that there are Scorpios that do great acts of good. There are also Scorpios that can do great acts of evil, and there can be a determination to cause as much damage as possible, and perhaps to take everyone down with them. And there is that self-destructive side to Scorpio. And one remembers what Aleister Crowley said about Scorpio, when he talked about the death card. So the death card in astrology is associated with Scorpio. At least Aleister Crowley made that association, and I think other tarot packs do as well. So if you look closely at Crowley's death card, you will see 3 animals on that card. You will see an eagle on that card, you will see a snake, and you will see a scorpion. And as far as Crowley is concerned, those were 3 aspects of Scorpio. Scorpio at its best is the eagle. It's able to rise above things. Things may be difficult, things may be complicated, but Scorpio can rise above it and get a perspective. But Scorpio can be a very defensive sign. It can be aware that it is a dangerous world. And so there we see Crowley's representation of the snake. The snake represents the defensive side of Scorpio, the side of Scorpio that wants to just crawl under a rock. Because what does a snake do when it's under a rock? Well, sometimes it sheds its skin. And so there we see the transformative side of Scorpio. And until quite recently, it was very popular to regard Pluto as being a ruler of Scorpio. Pluto does not rule Scorpio. I mean, it perhaps has an association with the sign Scorpio, but when you think of Pluto, you think of transformation. When you think of Scorpio, you think of transformation. And so the snake shedding its skin, moving from one phase to another, is a very Scorpio thing to do. And then you've got the scorpion itself. And the scorpion represents the worst side of Scorpio, the self-destructive side, the destructive side as well, that will do what it has to do, and it just can't be helped. One thinks of the old story, about the frog and the scorpion. There being a big, I'm sure you might have heard this story, the fable before. So, what is it? There's a big flood, and this scorpion is stranded, this frog and a scorpion are stranded in the middle of a river on a sandbank or something, and the scorpion asks the frog to take it to the other side of a river, and the frog says no, and the frog says no, because if you do that you'll sting me, and the scorpion promises not to sting the frog, and so the frog says okay, and then the frog starts to carry the scorpion across the river. Then of course the scorpion stings the frog and said, well, why'd you do that? We're all going to die. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Why'd you do that? Well, the scorpion said, well, I'm a scorpion. That's what I do. And so that might be the nature of some Scorpios, as they say, the less evolved Scorpio. I'm not very comfortable with that concept of some signs being more evolved than others, but sort of older books sort of like to talk about evolved Scorpios and unevolved Scorpios. So that might be a way of thinking about this sign. And I wanted to finish by just looking at a few people who happen to be Scorpios, and someone who used to be in the news quite a lot was Joe Biden, and sort of here is Joe Biden's horoscope. And yeah, Joe Biden was very much a Scorpio. And so how does one see Joe Biden's Scorpio nature? Well, the advantage of being a Scorpio is just being very persistent. I mean, once Scorpios, make a decision, they just, they stick with it. He stuck with his political career. When he got, he got elected to the presidency, he stayed with it. And so don't underestimate Scorpios. And Scorpios perhaps can be self-destructive when they are challenged. So, for example, when Joe Biden had that disastrous interview with Trump, he held off. It was suggested to him that he pull out of a presidency, that that there'd be perhaps an open primary to choose his replacement in the 2024 election, and then I think he just went and endorsed Kamala Harris. Of course, Kamala Harris was a disastrous candidate, and that might represent the destructiveness of Scorpio. When you push Scorpio, when you try to get Scorpio to do something they don't want to do. Okay, you could say that his wife who didn't want him to go, but still, it was his decision. When you get a Scorpio to do something they don't want to do, then they could do something which could be destructive, and they could take everyone down with them. And you could argue that that's what he did with the Republican Party in 2024. Though I think, regardless of whether or not there'd been an open primary, I think Trump would still have won. And another Scorpio in the news is the British King Charles III is a Scorpio, and he has his son at 22 Scorpio, and again, he is very fixed. I mean, he's very sort of determined, and he has beliefs. Scorpios do very often have strong beliefs, and when he was Prince of Wales, he would apparently he would send letters to the British cabinet and cabinet ministers asking them about his own pet projects. So he would sort of try to intervene to some extent, and he has his sort of own way of doing things, very fixed. And you could say that had said something about his relationships with Camilla, Camilla, sorry, not Kamala Harris, Camilla. With Camilla, he just stayed with her. It didn't matter the fact he got married to Diana, but in a way he hadn't forgotten about Camilla. She just carried. He just, in a way, that just carried on. And as Princess Diana said, she was just the other woman, and that might be the nature of Scorpio. And perhaps that contradicts a concept of Scorpio as being faithful. I think there can be something that is faithful But Scorpio is very subjective. He probably had his own arguments in his head about why it was okay not to be faithful to Diana. So Scorpios have their own view, and Scorpio is a very subjective sign. And I think that Charles's horoscope reminds us of that. Now, another perhaps positive view of Scorpio is to see Scorpio as someone who really wants to get to the bottom of things, who really wants to understand things. And you could say that we see that with Marie Curie. So Marie Curie, she had Sun, Saturn, Mercury, Mars in Scorpio, and she had no traditional planets in Earth signs. And that's really interesting, because if you think about what she did, she got a pile of Earth. She had Earth transported from all over Europe, I think particularly from Czechoslovakia, or okay, then it would not have been Czechoslovakia, it would have been part of Austria-Hungary, and she would have this Earth transported to Paris. So here is a woman with no Earth. She's got tons of Earth, pitch blende, a particular Earth very, very rich in radioactive materials, and she sifts through it. And so I think you can see the compensation here. She has so many planets in Scorpio that it has to switch into the other sign. So she spends, I think, years, her and her husband, sifting through this Earth, trying to refine it until she finally gets her radium together, gets this tiny amount of radium. And so I think in a way she sort of reflects that. And of course it's interesting that her only planet in Earth is Pluto in Taurus. And her Pluto, by the way, is very close to the Aries point. It's 45 degrees from the Aries point. And so she shows that Pluto, but Pluto is about something very, very small. In fact, she's got an exact Sun opposition Pluto in her chart. In other words, both 45 degrees, 135 degrees from the Aries point. And so that's a concept of something very, very small having huge amounts of power, and that is the nature of radioactive materials. And additionally, with Scorpio, Scorpio can have, Scorpio in terms of being successful, Scorpio is not in itself an innovator. I mean, there are other reasons why a Scorpio can be an innovator, but it's not in itself an innovator. Instead, Scorpio can understand the way things are going. It can understand trends, and because of that, it can be successful. I mean, with Elon Musk as a Cancerian, but that perhaps he's reflecting the ability of people with a lot of water signs to understand a broader trend. And with Bill Gates, for example, Microsoft. Yeah, I don't think Bill Gates is an innovator, really. I mean, he was obviously very clever. He knew a lot about computers, but he knew the way things were going. And so here, with Sun in Scorpio with Microsoft, and that might, and just getting in at a very low early level, because he knew he could perhaps feel it on an emotional level. One can say other things about his Sun in Scorpio and the fact that he's got a Venus-Saturn conjunction in his personal life, but I haven't got time to go into details about his chart. Now, Scorpio additionally can be attracted to things that are dangerous, and Marie Curie was attracted to things that were dangerous, but she didn't know they were dangerous at the time. But you could be attracted to snakes. So Joseph Slovinsky was born on November 15th, 1962, and he had three personal planets in Scorpio plus Neptune, and so he was a snake expert. And so you can see that Scorpios being interested in poisonous things, and he went to the Burmese jungle just before around the time of 9/11, and he got bitten by a crate, and a crate as in Krait, not crate as in a box. A crate is, of course, an incredibly poisonous snake, and he was in the middle of a Burmese jungle. He got bitten I think on 9/11 or the day before 9/11, around 9/11. So it was difficult to get in contact with anyone. The U.S. Embassy did send a helicopter, but it was too late, and so he died, and so he died of a crate bite. But that connection between poisonous snakes and things that creep, and of course a snake. Remember with Crowley, a snake is one of the symbols of the sign Scorpio. So we've been kind of looking at the good. I mean, I don't think any of the people I've talked about so far are particularly bad in total. They might have bad aspects of their personality, and then you're starting, with perhaps the bad. I mean, you've got Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay. Well, Scorpio can be about destruction and revenge, and a belief that you have got to absolutely destroy things. And Curtis LeMay was an Air Force general. He was the mastermind, I believe, of the Tokyo fire bombings and in 1945. And he was a strong advocate for using nuclear weapons or threatening to use nuclear weapons against the Soviet Union in the late 1940s, before the Soviet Union had the atomic bomb. Of course, if you're a neocon, you'd probably take the view that Curtis LeMay was right. I'm not giving an opinion on that, but I think that might have been unwise to have a nuclear war, to fire nuclear weapons at the Soviet Union before it had nuclear weapons itself. I somehow don't think the world would have quite forgiven the United States. And Curtis LeMay, later on, he became a vice presidential candidate, I think in the 1968 election, when his with Wallace, when the sort of Southern Democrats broke with the mainstream Democrats, and so that may say something about his political opinions and his basic approach. And then you have got the ugly. Someone who has been in the news recently was Brian Kohberger. Brian Kohberger was the one who killed those 4 housemates in Moscow, Idaho. I mean, he's now serving a life sentence, and he was born on November the 21st, 1994. So his sun is definitely in Scorpio. This is a noon chart. So you can see that Scorpio, he had this idea, it seems, that he was going to kill 4 people. Or I don't know how many people he wanted to kill. We don't quite know why he did what he did, but he had a plan to break into a house and kill at least one person, and that's what he did. So quite why Scorpios can have very complicated psychology. So that's sort of Brian Kohberger. And perhaps the most infamous Scorpio is Charles Manson. I don't think I really need to say anything about that. So Charles Manson has sun in Scorpio, a very charismatic person. His family, they listened to them. The personality there. He had a strong personality, and of course his followers went out and killed Sharon Tate, and others. So that might be Scorpio at its worst. And Jimmy Savile, if you're in the UK, you'll know about Jimmy Savile. So Jimmy Savile was a TV star. He had a show called Jim Will Fix It, and where he would help children find what they were. Children would have a dream, they'd have an aim, and they'd send letters to him, and he would help them find it. Jim Will Fix It. Then there was this earlier in the 60s. Well, not just the 60s. There was this. There was a show called Top of the Pops, which was the first sort of mainstream pop music channel that he hosted. And so everyone thought he was wonderful. But all the while, he was committing these sort of sexual offences against women, young women. I think underage women. I'm not quite sure about. I don't really know about the details. It's not Jimmy Savile. I haven't really gone into, I haven't really looked at the Jimmy Savile issue in great detail. But it was an example of him using his fame to get what he wanted, and to his Scorpio desires. And so that's another example of Scorpio working in an absolutely horrible way. And the self-destructiveness of Scorpio, well, you can see Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda. So here's Joseph Goebbels' chart, sun at 6 degrees Scorpio, his wife Magda Goebbels with her sun at 17 Scorpio. These two Scorpios, they get married. They had children. They have quite a lot of children. I think they had 4 children. I mean, she had another children from another marriage. I think they had 4 children. And so there was an opportunity for Magda Goebbels and her children to leave Berlin before it fell to the Soviets, but she just stayed there. And right at the end, she, with the help of an SS doctor, she killed all her children, before she committed suicide, and her husband committed suicide as well. And so she kind of reflects the very worst aspect of Scorpio, the Scorpion itself, the Scorpion who is self-destructive. And you remember that, the story, I don't know if it's true, but if you surround a Scorpion with a ring of petrol or gasoline and you set it on fire, set the gasoline on fire, the Scorpion will sting itself to death. And in this case, this Scorpio couple, this nightmare Scorpio couple, killed their children and killed themselves. That is the self-destruction. They couldn't consider life beyond the Second World War, beyond Hitler. They were totally bought into the Hitler idea, and they could have saved their children. I mean, Joseph Goebbels could have, but no, they just decided it would be better if they all just died before before the Soviets closed in on them. So those are a few thoughts on Sun in Scorpio. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.